Thank you, colleagues. Today, our committee continues its study of Bill C-242, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, temporary residence visas for parents and grandparents. Joining us today for our first panel is Mr. Kareem El-Assal, Director of Policy for CanadaVisa. Thank you very much for joining us today. I now invite Mr. El-Assal to provide opening remarks. Mr. El-Assal, the floor is yours.
As Mr. Siebeck pointed out in yesterday's session, the main reason why this bill should be passed is to codify the reforms he has proposed into law. Although 2 of his 3 proposals have already been adopted by the government, the risk is they were adopted via ministerial instructions, meaning they could easily be changed or reversed by a future government. Passing this bill will provide certainty to immigrant families and will promote a host of benefits for the Canadian government and Canadian society at large. First, immigrant families will know their parents and grandparents will be able to stay in Canada for 5 years at a time. They won't have to worry about a new government deciding to reduce the length of stay without warning via ministerial instructions. Increasing the length of stay also reduces the amount of time and money immigrant families would need to spend submitting application renewals, and fewer applications would also help IRCC with a more manageable workload. Second, increasing competition by allowing the minister to designate foreign health insurance providers would give families more choice and more affordable options in theory. Increased competition also incentivizes Canadian and foreign providers alike to offer the best products and services to applicants. I'd also like to note, with Canada increasing its immigration levels and the super visa becoming a more attractive option thanks to these reforms, we should see more super visa applicants moving forward. This would be a good thing for Canadian insurance providers and the hundreds of thousands of Canadians they employ. The third provision of the bill is another really important benefit to us all. It places a legal requirement on the minister to explore how to modify the LICO to make the super visa more accessible. It also creates greater oversight on the minister by requiring them to present their findings to Parliament and the public. This is obviously a good thing. It also strikes a nice balance within this bill. On the one hand, we're giving the minister more authority by allowing them to designate foreign health insurance providers, but we're also balancing this newfound authority by holding the minister to account to ensure the government remains steadfast in its commitment of bringing families together. Before I conclude, I'd like to stress the importance of addressing existing challenges and identifying more ways so that we can accommodate the strong demands to bring more parents and grandparents to Canada. For the parents and grandparents program itself, our only permanent residence pathway, we can consider introducing rolling expressions of interest and holding weighted lotteries each year. For the super visa itself, although IRCC is now processing record levels of TRV applications, the department continues to fall short of its own super visa processing standards. This needs to be remedied. We can also complement the super visa by offering new additional temporary resident pathways to parents and grandparents. I'm not claiming any of the following ideas are perfect, but I like to propose them nonetheless to stimulate dialogue. What about introducing a visa pathway to parents and grandparents who demonstrate they have sufficient enough savings to support themselves in Canada? That way, we do not penalize those who may not meet the LICO on legitimate grounds. On this note, we can consider waiving the LICO requirement altogether for those who do not meet it at the time of their application due to legitimate reasons such as having very recently started a new job, having gone on maternity leave, pursuing education, illness, or having young children at home. On the latter point, the arrival of parents and grandparents can enable Canadians to work more hours and save more money since they no longer have to worry about childcare. We can consider introducing a work permit option for parents and grandparents that want to work and supplement the household income. This can also prove beneficial for low-income households. Maybe we can introduce a sponsorship undertaking to create a legal requirement for families to pay back any public benefits potentially claimed by parents and grandparents. We should also evaluate global comparators. If you look at Australia, for example, they offer around 10 different permanent and temporary visa options for parents, grandparents, and elderly family members. At the moment here in Canada, we only have 3 options: the PGP, the Super Visa, and the TRV. Keep in mind, Canada's newcomer targets are much higher than Australia's, more than double on the PR front.
Ask you to please not use acronyms, PGP, TRP. Alphabet soup is a little difficult for us, so please proceed again.
PGP is the Parents and Grandparents Program. TRVs are temporary resident visas. Okay. IRCC is Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada.
That one we know.
To conclude, the introduction of the Super Visa in 2011 was considered innovative. Perhaps it's time we go back to the drawing board to innovate some more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. El-Assal, and forgive the interruption. Colleagues, you will each have 5 minutes for your question and your answer. I would like to remind you all, both members and senators in the room, to please refrain from leaning in too close to the microphone or remove your earpiece when doing so. This avoids any sound feedback that could negatively impact the committee staff in the room. The first question goes to Vice Chair Senator Bovey, followed by Senator Osler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your witness testimony and your thoughts. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, in my 5 minutes. You talked about the idea of parents and grandparents having their own income to be able to come. I wonder I'd like you to elaborate a bit on your thoughts on the minimum income threshold and the lowering of that, if you can, please.
Well, I think we have to understand the rationale behind the LICO. It does serve pros and cons. You know, there's a pro in terms of having a threshold to ensure that there isn't a race to the bottom in terms of the living standards of immigrant families. On the other hand, because the way this policy is enforced is fairly binary, either you met the threshold or you don't, it doesn't take into consideration legitimate reasons as to why someone has fallen short. So let's say, for instance, I just started a new job and my salary is very high. At that time, because I haven't met the LICO over the last year, I wouldn't be eligible to access the Super Visa. Or let's say, for instance, an individual has gone on mat leave, right? But they did previously surpass the LICO requirement. So I think there needs to be a bit of discretion there so that we can be more accommodating to achieve the spirit of the Super Visa, which of course, again, is to bring families together.
I understand that you agree with the lowering of the minimum, that minimum income threshold. And perhaps you could talk to that a bit about your idea of work permits for the parents and grandparents who may be coming in under this provision.
Yeah, this seems like a novel approach, and one may wonder, why even contemplate this? Interestingly, yesterday in your session with the IRCC officials, one of them pointed out that roughly 40% of Super Visa admissions are individuals that fall between the ages of 51 and 60. So they're still in working age, right? So why not at the very least give them the option that if they so choose to be able to work in Canada? Of course, we're all aware of the historic number of job vacancies we face. It's been at around 1 million job vacancies for the better part of the pandemic. This can be another way of alleviating pressure within our labor market.
So that would be a regulation rather than a provision in the bill itself?
Yes, so this falls outside of the bill itself, but what I'm pointing out is that this bill itself is a good one. As Mr. Seebeck pointed out yesterday, we shouldn't allow perfection to be the enemy of the good. We do need to find additional solutions to help alleviate the significant demand we face in terms of Canadians looking to reunite with their parents and grandparents.
Thank you.
So what I'm saying, sorry, Senator. What I'm saying is we have the parents and grandparents program. Let's enhance the super visa, but let's also complement these two options in the TR and the temporary resident visas with additional solutions.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Bovey. Senator Osler.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for your testimony. My question relates to the extension of the maximum period of stay. With the super visa applicants, the extension going from 2 years to 5 years. I think you've spoken to some of the benefits of extending the maximum period of stay. Could you comment on the challenges and any possible unintended consequences?
Certainly. So as a general rule of thumb, the longer a temporary resident remains in Canada, the higher probability their ties to their home country wane, right? And so as a result, it may be harsh and punitive after the 10-year duration of the super visa has expired for the person to have to return home. They may no longer be in a position to do so or have strong enough ties to do so. So that raises the possibility that we would have more humanitarian and compassionate applications being submitted to the government, right? So this is something that we definitely need to consider.
Supplementary? Has there been any thought or consideration on how to handle that possibility of increased applicants?
I think this question could better be addressed by the department itself, because they're the ones that have insights in terms of how frequently this happens, what the volumes are. I mean, at the end of the day, they may report back that this is a overblown concern, and in fact, the number of H&C applications they've received from super visa admissions is very low. But it is a possibility that perhaps we can explore more by looking at the data.
Thank you. Yesterday, the officials did point out that they had no evidence, substantial evidence, to lead us to that conclusion, just for Mr. El-Assal's information. Senator Dasco, followed by Senator Kutcher.
Thanks for being here, Mr. El-Assal. You were talking about the possible improvements to the program, and I think you mentioned that there were 10, but I'm not sure you actually got through your list of possible improvements. So did you leave any out? I mean, if you wouldn't mind just saying if you didn't get through your list yet. I also wanted to ask you which of the possible improvements that you were referring to, which do you think is the most important improvement to the program that should be made, and also which of the improvements do you think are the most feasible that we can make to the program? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your questions. I think the lowest hanging fruit is IRCC simply achieve its own service standards. The department sets benchmarks for itself by saying, these are the reasonable goals we expect to be able to achieve to process these applications. So when it comes to the super visa, I believe the benchmark it set for itself is about 4 months. I took a look at the department's website yesterday. It ranges between 5 to 12 months for most countries, right? In the last year, it reported its ability to achieve its service standards for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. It said it was able to achieve its service standards just over half of the time, right? So this is an area, again, which is the lowest hanging fruit. Let's make inroads here. I'd like to see improvements to the parents and grandparents program. We haven't come up with an adequate way of managing the demand. A huge concern I have is that we've prevented any new entrants from expressing their interest to sponsor their parents or grandparents for over 2.5 years now. What happened was in October of 2020, IRCC said, if you're interested in sponsoring your parents or grandparents for permanent residence, please fill out a form on our website. The department got 200,000 submissions. They've closed submissions ever since, right? We haven't even given individuals a chance, right? So these are within our existing tools, ways that we can address the situation. Again, I would like us to introduce additional options. As I noted, Australia has about 10 different visas for not only parents and grandparents, but elderly family members. Canada welcomes way more immigrants and newcomers than Australia. So why is it that we only have 3 options?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kutcher, followed by Senator Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. El-Assad, for your testimony. Very appreciated. I'm trying to wrap my head around some of these insurance issues, and I wonder if you could help with your thoughts on this. We have a letter from the Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association, who can't be with us, but I'm sure your firm knows this area cold. I just want to read what they say and then get your thoughts on it. Quote, there is significant risk associated with authorizing foreign insurance companies to maintain program integrity. We would not object to a limited number of foreign insurance brokers and underwriters being subject to equivalent standards to brokers and underwriters in Canada. We also recommend that any authorization of foreign health insurance involve robust information programs to make it clear that only authorized insurance brokers and underwriters are eligible, and this is important, to avoid the victimization of Canadians and their parents and grandparents. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, whether this legislation needs to have something like that in it, or do you think that the ministerial list would be able to address this kind of concern?
So the ministerial list would be able to address this sort of concern. However, IRCC would need to engage in a significant public relations campaign to make Canadians and their parents and grandparents aware that it is only the insurance providers on this list that are authorized to provide coverage under the super visa.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's excellent advice. In your opinion, how well has IRCC rolled out, and how effectively have they rolled out various information campaigns?
I wish I could plead the fifth here. Sometimes it doesn't, they do an excellent job. Sometimes they leave a lot to be desired.
Yes, thank you.
Senator Martin, followed by Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chair. I was curious about what Senator Kutcher just asked as well, so I can continue maybe looking at the insurance policy aspect of this bill. And earlier, Mr. El-Assad, you talked about, some innovations that could be considered like work permits for parents and grandparents. So you do have, you've brought some really good ideas forward. So this is a work in progress, and I did ask the officials this last night, but may I ask, in your opinion, what is the best method for establishing the proposed list of designated foreign insurers?
So I would say that the minister and the government would need to consult widely with industry experts. They would need to establish benchmarks in terms of the criteria that these foreign insurers would need to meet. They need to clearly identify the criteria publicly so that all stakeholders are aware of what the thresholds are. And this as well would be the fairest way in terms of the foreign providers understanding what processes and requirements they need to fulfill to be to be considered eligible. The reason, Senator, this is important is because we're already seeing this challenge in the immigration sector when it comes to the language testers that are designated by IRCC. The department itself, in an internal memo that I obtained last year, conceded they do not have a transparent framework in place to allow potential new entrants in the language testing sector. to be able to offer their tests to immigration applicants, right? So to their credit, they recognize this limitation. Let's learn from it, and let's ensure that we have a transparent and open process and a fair framework in place so that this policy works as intended, works as effectively as intended.
Yes, and in terms of the criteria that would be used, did you want to articulate any that would be important to be part of the criteria?
To be honest, Senator, I feel like there's many other insurance experts that would be better placed to outline benchmarks here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Moody.
Welcome to our committee, Mr. El-Assal. My question to you is around data. Yesterday, I think we learned that there are significant gaps in our understanding of just how successful these three pathways that you mentioned have been. You know, we heard that there are questions about super visa holders defaulting on insurance. There's no real knowledge about how often that happens. Phrases like significant or substantial, being aware of significant or substantial issues surrounding this were some of the answers we got, not numbers, or a clear understanding that those numbers are known. How many super visa holders transfer and try to become permanent visa holders? These are all important questions on how we evaluate the current status and how we might evaluate a new program. What's your thought on data and what the current status of data collection is that informs us about how we move forward? What would you like to see collected?
Thank you, Senator, for raising all these issues. They're near and dear to my heart. What I'll say is that we do have significant data at our disposal. Entire CC's credit, they have crunched the numbers and provided public insights in terms of the performance of various streams. So for instance, they conducted an evaluation of the parents and grandparents program a few years ago, which I studied. And they outlined, I felt in a nuanced way, both the economic and social benefits of the parents and grandparents program, as well as some of the limitations. So we do have a fairly good understanding there. With respect to the super visa, all this data is available. I agree with you. Perhaps what we can do is have the department share them more widely so that all stakeholders can access and analyze them to make sure we're making evidence-based decisions moving forward.
El-Assal, I have a couple of questions of my own. Let me start with an assumption that if this law is passed, we will see more super visa applications. I mean, I'm making that assumption. It may not be true. So let's start with that. Can we make a fair assumption that the number of applicants will go up and therefore the number of temporary visa holders in this stream will also go up in Canada?
Yes, we can make a fair assumption on two fronts. Number one, Canada is welcoming more immigrants. So just by that alone, we're going to see more super visa applications moving forward. And then secondly, I submit to you that these reforms make the super visa far more appealing. And so as a result, we should, in theory, see more Canadians access this program.
You proposed an interesting idea around allowing these temporary residents who are parents and grandparents to fill labor market needs. It's an intriguing idea, but it goes against one of the main arguments for the bill, which is parents and grandparents come to help the children, to support the family, to look after the home. And I know there's no purity in all of this, but I was just wondering, is there not some slight contradiction here?
Not at all, Senator. I think we can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, right? We're not saying we expect these parents and grandparents to work 40 hours a week and to shoulder economic load for Canada's future. What we're saying is let's give them the option, if they so choose, to work, while at the same time, if it's required, the family can decide, yeah, we need their assistance on the childcare front, right? One thing I want to point out, Senator, and this is a topic I studied, I looked at 2016 census immigrant incomes by family size. As a general rule, the larger the family, higher the income is, and the income levels are comparable to the household income sizes of Canadian families, right? So like one of the limitations we make when we assess the outcomes of immigrants is we look at them as individuals rather than as part of family units, right? And so like, even if you're adding an additional income and let's say that person is only making minimum wage, still goes a long way because at the end of the day, it helps to equalize the household income of immigrants with their Canadian-born counterparts.
Thank you. Let me probe a little further. You talked about an Australian program with 10 different streams. So a question, since we do have time, are you able to quickly orient us to these 10 streams, or can you send us some information about the various routes so that we can refer to them in our study report?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be happy to share the link to the Australian government's website with the clerk. What I'll point out is, interestingly, Australian government looks to accommodate families looking to reunite, both on the low and the high end of the income spectrums, right? So like they have visa options for higher net worth individuals, right? For parents and grandparents. If they demonstrate that they have high levels of income, they can pay a higher fee to be able to reunite with their children and grandchildren in Australia. And conversely, for people on the lower end of the income spectrum, they do a needs-based assessment. You know, they do have humanitarian elements within their visa regime. And so, for instance, if a parent or grandparents, last remaining family are in Australia, the Australian government will look to accommodate them as well. Right? I think we have to remember at the end of the day, Canada's immigration system has three main objectives: strengthen the economy, reunite families, and to help refugees, right? And so when we're looking at the parents and grandparents program, we really have to focus on the family and the societal benefits of bringing parents and grandparents over to Canada. Of course, we don't want to have, we want to mitigate potential economic challenges, but at the end of the day, we need to allow the familial considerations to carry the day.
Thank you. Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. El-Assal. It's nice to see you again. I think the last time you and I met was back in the pre-pandemic days, and you and I were in different roles. But I'm really pleased to see you've continued to research this topic in great detail. So congratulations for that. My question will be about the bubblegum part of your proposal. Regarding parents and grandparents working, can this be handled by regulation or by a ministerial order as opposed to making any changes to this bill? Because I think that's one of the things you want to keep in mind is not making any changes to this bill as we address it.
Yes, absolutely. The minister can introduce a policy reform with the stroke of a pen, enabling parents and grandparents to access work permits in Canada.
Mr. El-Assal, we've talked a little bit about risk here today in this session. Perhaps from your point of view and where you're sitting and what you know, I wonder if you could address the issue of risk and to whom the risk is in all of this.
Of course, there are risks. So I think we have touched on many of them. I mean, I don't want to focus on the negatives, but to have a balanced conversation, you do have to focus on, you do have to explore the upside and downside risks. So on the downside, introducing foreign entrants, even if it's highly regulated by the government, by the Canadian government, does pose risk. We see this in the international student sector, where even though IRCC outlines on its website the over 1,500 designated learning institutions that make international students eligible for post-graduation work permits, we still have unscrupulous actors overseas that are able to convince international students to go to a particular Canadian higher educational institution that is in fact not a designated language learning institution, right? And so as a result, these students lose a lot of money, and at the end of the day, they don't get the coveted post-graduation work permit, which they're looking for in order to pursue permanent residence. And so the concern here is that unscrupulous foreign actors may convince parents and grandparents, or even the Canadians, that a particular health insurance provider makes them eligible for the super visa. They pay the premium, and then unfortunately, their application gets denied when they submit it to IRCC, and they've lost a lot of money, right? So we have to be very careful about this, which is why I'm an advocate of a vigorous public relations campaign by IRCC to help inform the public that it's only these providers that the minister has reviewed and designated that can offer medical insurance for the purpose of the super visa.
Thank you.
That's just one of the risks.
We have time, Mr. El-Assal. You can carry on or choose to stop there.
Well, I mean, we've discussed them already. I do think that the department can help us. They do have this data. I don't think they're hiding it. I think we just need to encourage them to share it. How many of the 144,000 or so individuals who have obtained a super visa since it was introduced in 2011 have in fact decided to make an H&C claim to remain here as permanent residents? Right, that's something we need to evaluate to ensure that moving forward, as the super visa admissions grow as expected, there aren't the unintended consequence of people deciding to access the H&C as a means of remaining here permanently. We don't want to have loopholes in place, right? So this is something that we need to evaluate. At the end of the day, program integrity is in all of our benefit, right? Including for the Canadians looking to bring their parents and grandparents over, right? So we just want to make sure that we don't have these sorts of challenges moving forward.
Senator Cardozo, you second round, colleagues.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a question on numbers and data, Mr. El-Assal. What is your estimate of how many people would come in through this program, and how does it relate to our immigration target, especially in terms of the 500,000 target for years going forward?
I can't provide an estimate. All we can do is work off of the data provided to us by IRCC. So Senator Cardozo actually looked at IRCC's temporary resident visa figures yesterday. Unfortunately, they don't delineate between overall TRVs and the super visa. However, again, this data is available. So submitting a custom request to them will allow us to see what the numbers have been since the super visa was launched in 2011. What we do know from the department, and they noted this yesterday as well in your session, is they've welcomed 144,000 since 2011, which works out to an average about 17,000 per year. With respect to the interplay between our immigration levels targets and the super visa itself, there isn't much of a link. There's no cap for the super visa, whereas there's a cap for our PR admissions. It's 465,000 this year. It's going to rise to 500,000 by 2025. We also know that the parents and grandparents program admissions will gradually rise over the next 3 years. However, there's no connection whatsoever between obtaining a super visa and your odds of being invited under the parents and grandparents program. They're two completely different processes.
Yeah, but one of the reasons that it intrigues me is the issue of having parents and grandparents be able to work. You're dealing with immigrants who will come here and have a support network automatically. They won't be using immigrant center type services, but they may work, and so they may contribute to the economy in that way. And I'm keeping in mind the point that Madam Chair made in terms of some of the contradictions of such an approach. But is there sort of a cushion that we would be adding in a sense, and are we reducing risk of this?
Sorry to interrupt, Senator. May I continue?
Yeah, please.
I believe we would be mitigating risk. Again, let's give them the option. If they do want to work, if they do want to contribute. Going back to the earlier question by the Senator about data, one of the interesting findings from IRCC's evaluation of the Parents and Grandparents Program a few years ago is they found that a decent share of parents and grandparents who come here as permanent residents do work, right? Again, so, you know, if they're motivated, if they're interested in working to keep themselves busy to supplement the household income, let's give them that option. And as a corollary, the benefits to us is we are mitigating any potential fiscal risk to Canadian taxpayers. Just to be balanced, I'm going to outline a counter argument which I've heard myself, which is that let's keep family class streams for family. Let's keep economic streams for for the economy, right? And so some may argue we shouldn't, you know, focus on offering work permit pathways to parents and grandparents. We shouldn't look at potential economic class options for them because at the end of the day, we're more focused on the societal benefits of family reunification. I don't buy that argument. I mean, I understand it, but I do feel that we have to evaluate all the options available to us. And I feel this can help to alleviate the demand on the Parents and Grandparents Program overall.
Mr. Al-Assal, yesterday we heard from the department that they're not overly concerned, at least that's the perception I took away. They're not terribly overly concerned that super visa temporary residents in Canada will come with insurance, and they may allow that insurance to lapse, thus creating a hazard for themselves, their families, for the systems, for the provincial healthcare system, etc., etc. Would you be concerned about that?
Well, an important point to consider, and Mr. Seaback, he stressed this yesterday, is that these parents and grandparents must complete a medical exam before they come to Canada. The medical exam, the panel physicians are designated by IRCC and the Canadian government, right? So they are coming here in good health, right? So we're mitigating the risk that way. And then in addition, we're complementing our risk management by requiring that they obtain medical insurance, right? Again, let's access data from IRCC to see if we are seeing an uptake among super visa admissions in accessing provincial healthcare services, but we shouldn't speculate either.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question to help me understand things properly when it comes to certain risks and insurance. What I understand is that someone who applies for a super visa, so we're talking about 2 years, we could be talking about 5 years, they have to appear with this medical exam and insurance. If according to my understanding, it's for 1 year. So after 1 year, it's the responsibility of the individuals to renew that insurance, I imagine. And you clarify this for me. Is there any verification that this insurance has been renewed? And if not, do we know whether it happens a lot that people don't renew the insurance? And what happens then? I suppose the person is responsible if something happens to them, but I'm trying to understand that environment when it comes to a 1 year insurance for a stay that could be longer.
Senator, for your excellent questions. For your first question, your understanding is correct. And for your second question, no, there is no verification. And so in terms of knowing how many people voluntarily allow their coverage to lapse because we don't verify, we don't have data on that. I think this is something for us to explore. How do we do it in a way that doesn't come across as invasive? I don't know. But it is one of the loopholes that exists with the super visa. Just to clarify this even further, Senator, if someone on the super visa decides to leave Canada, for them to be able to re-enter the country, they must once again prove that they have the insurance coverage for 1 year. However, as you note, the person decides to remain in Canada for an extended period of time. I mean, simply beyond the first year, there's no verification. They can have their coverage lapse with little to no consequence in terms of their visa status.
Until something goes terribly wrong, and then there is a serious consequence. Thank you, Senator Petitclerc. Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to follow up from Senator Cardoso's questions on the work permit, my understanding is that now on the super visa, the work permit is not easily obtainable. Speaking from personal family experience, this may result in people coming under this rubric to move into underpaid and unregulated work, where they would be at risk for all sorts of negative potential no protections. Has that discussion happened to your understanding, and if so, what have been the outcomes of those conversations?
It's an excellent observation, Senator. That is a very real possibility. To the best of my knowledge, I can't think of too many ways for an individual on a super visa to be able to access a work permit. Right, the options are few and far between. And so, yes, it does raise the possibility in theory that they may go underground in terms of, sorry, not underground, in terms of working under the table.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Bernard.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up on the question that Senator Kutcher asked, because this is something I've been thinking about as well, in terms of employability. And so one of the things I think I heard you say in response to a question earlier was that there are several people under other classes of immigration schemes that grandparents and parents are working. And I'm wondering if there is any research that tells us what their experiences in the employment sector are or have been, because we know that we have a history in this country of people being exploited, experiencing racism and discrimination in the workplace. So I'm wondering if there's been any research that has looked at this specifically.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So the only group of parents and grandparents who are able to work in Canada are those who are admitted under the Parents and Grandparents Permanent Residence Program. We do have data in terms of their participation in the Canadian labor market. Statistics Canada, in conjunction with IRCC, collects longitudinal data on the economic and socioeconomic outcomes of immigrants in Canada. They release this on an annual basis. So it is available. In terms of answering your question more specifically, in terms of whether it has been analyzed of the sectors, occupation, as well as potential discrimination that parents and grandparents have faced in the labor market, I'm not aware, to the best of my knowledge, that this sort of research has been conducted. Whether it's possible, yes, it's possible. The data is available.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. El-Assal, for spending so much time with us and sharing your perspectives and information with us. We will take all that you have said into consideration as we write our report on the bill, and no doubt we will see you again at this committee sometime in the future. Colleagues, we will take a short break before we convene the industry panel. We are adjourned.